question out of the gate, Secretary Buttigieg, is why do we transport vinyl chloride at all? The second day after this disaster, we had a University of Pittsburgh distinguished fellow in chemical engineering say people who make PVC should create vinyl chloride on site. So why do we transport it? Why is that a thing that we do?
I think that is a good question to look at. What we know is that right now, as long as it is lawful to transport this, it has to be transported safely. It's one of the reasons why the big push that we're making right now as a department, both on industry, on ourselves, and on Congress, is to make sure that every measure that can make our rails safer is being pursued. Look, the industry has been very effective at rolling back regulations or watering them down, but we're pushing for things like stronger tank cars that can withstand impacts in a stronger way. Originally, that was supposed to be done by 2025. That got worked in 2029. I'm calling on the railroads to do it sooner than the legal minimum, because that's just one example of something we can do, whether it's this or anything else that has to be transported by rail, that it's safe for every community that it comes near.
We've heard a lot about transparency. Is there a way for Americans to find out where vinyl chloride is being transported right now today via rail, maybe even by barge or truck or air? We're all sort of learning a lot about this, but is there a way to know if this hazardous material is coming through our communities?
Well, what I will say is that one of the things we're calling for today is for railroad companies to be proactive in notifying states and local jurisdictions when they're bringing hazardous materials into the area. We have that requirement on some of the most hazardous and flammable things that move, but that is something that needs to expand. And again, rather than waiting for us to go through all of the legal steps to require it, I'm calling on the railroads to do that proactively so that first responders are ready. We have trained thousands of first responders around the country through programs that our department runs to be ready for hazardous material incidents that could arise, but they need better visibility on what's coming their way. I'm not aware, possibly for security reasons, I'm not aware of a way that all of those kinds of movements are made public, but at a minimum, it should be transparent to local officials who might be called on to respond.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at the response to this, as Secretary of Transportation in this country, how could the response have been better?
Well, I think one thing that I could have done sooner is share my feelings about this incident and what it meant to the community in East Palestine. We take pains to respect the independent role of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. They have the lead, especially in the early days, on the investigation, and it's been important to me to stay out of their way. But we've had personnel on the ground from day one, and from day one, this administration, whether it's on the environmental side or on the transportation side, has been there to support residents. I think what we now need to do is to look at the road ahead and make sure that this represents a change, that the future is not like the past when it comes to the railroad industry's ability to water down regulation and to frankly make it harder for us to enforce. I'll give you an example. If we catch a railroad in a hazardous material violation, even one that results in a fatality, the most that we can fine them for is about $250,000. Norfolk Southern is a multi-billion-dollar company, and those big railroad companies are not necessarily going to be moved to change their practices based on fines at that level. So I'm calling on Congress to change the law that limits how much we can hold those companies accountable and make those fines enough to actually get these companies' attention.
At the same time, is there some executive action that could take place immediately through your office and through the office of the president to make things safer for Americans?
Yes, there are some things that we are doing in response to this. Again, NTSB might take a while to complete their report, and we'll use those findings for further action, but we don't have to wait for that final product to know that certain things make sense. We're going to have a stepped up inspection, a focus inspection program for some of the routes where the most high hazardous materials go through. Also, something we've been working on from day one in this administration is advancing a rule that will make clear that you have to have at least 2 people on a train. I'm not saying it might have applied in this particular case, but as a general rule, when it comes to safety, I think a lot of Americans would be surprised to know that the railroad industry has been pushing to be allowed to have just one person on trains that could be a mile long or longer. Think about what happens if 3/4 of the way through the train there's a problem and there's only one person on a mile-long train ready to deal with it. Now, because of the legalities of it, it takes a while to complete that regulation, but that's an example of something we've already had underway in addition to the new actions that we are accelerating or adding based on what we've already learned from this incident.
And that all of that sounds pretty challenging at a time when you're working with the railroad unions and trying to avert strikes in the past year, and looking forward. Golly, your job is really difficult now. It doesn't just deal with transportation. You're having to deal with the health of people, but you're also having to deal with environmental calamity here, and there's some real questions about that. When you look at what happened right on our border with Pennsylvania and Ohio, and the little panhandle of West Virginia there too, and the folks who live there, emotionally and personally, how did you react to this? And when you see the visuals of that big fireball and that plume of smoke, what did that do to you personally?
Well, emotionally, the first thing you think about is what these families are going through. This happens in your neighborhood. This happens over your home. You're wondering whether you're going to be safe, whether your home will ever be safe. Now, that's why the EPA has been working so forcefully to make sure that Norfolk Southern is held accountable. But certainly, as somebody who oversees transportation policies, it makes me feel very strongly as well about who we're protecting and why it's so important to advance and raise the bar on rail safety regulation. Look, it is tough. I got to tell you, in Washington, it is tough to move past resistance from industry when you're trying to make things safer. But there's a reason we have these regulations, and there's a reason why we need to take them to the next level. And unfortunately, that cloud over that community of East Palestine, where people did nothing wrong, they had this thrust upon them. It's a reminder of why this work is so important.
What do you say to the people who live in East Palestine? I would say even in Pennsylvania, in Arlington Township, there's a little slice of our state that's connected to that. And it's funny, downriver, the Ohio, we're upstream in Pittsburgh, but my goodness, do you say to folks who are really hurting and really angry that the federal government, they say, did not do enough and did not do enough fast enough?
Well, I want people to know that you are not alone. We have been on the ground as an administration from the first hours of this situation, and we will not let this go until Norfolk Southern has been accountable, until all of the cleanup has taken place, and until we have applied every lesson learned in terms of what NTSB is going to find about the root causes to make our railways safer. These families have been through a lot, and the biggest thing I want them to know is that they can expect us to stay on this relentlessly. Again, both to hold Norfolk Southern accountable, but also more broadly to make sure that rail in this country gets safer for them and for every community that sits on or near rail lines.
And just speaking about transportation more broadly and making it safer, you also want to make sure that this is part of the growing economy for this region. It's like we have to balance all these things. Is there anything you want to tell folks right here in Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio about your role and your position in trying to balance those things, the safety, and also trying to grow jobs and make sure the economy is stable?
Well, our focus is to make sure that it's economic growth that works for everybody, that works for workers, that works for communities. Unfortunately, you have some situations where multi-billion-dollar companies like Norfolk Southern and these freight railroads have been able to have way too much influence in Washington. But something else is going on, which I think is America saying, wait a minute, we can have economic growth and take care of workers. We can have railroad companies that are doing well as companies and sick leave, which railroad workers deserve. We can build our infrastructure and build it in a way that creates a lot of good paying union jobs, which is a major priority for President Biden, and it's a major priority for my department. This is a moment where we can provide the way to an economy that really does work for everybody, not by putting profits above people, but by making sure that this growth happens in a responsible way, in a safe way. And that's exactly why departments like mine exist in the first place.
Can you tell me any more about why you think that Norfolk Southern has too much influence in Washington, and if you foresee that changing at all, considering the rules and lobbying?
Well, here's why I think there might be something a little different. I have been hearing from people in Congress, including people who often, frankly, side with industry and against regulation, who now that this incident has happened are saying they want to be part of the solution. So I'm going to hold them to that. We'll find out whether they're serious. But I have a list of specific things that Congress can do, from accelerating the adoption of these new, stronger tank cars, to making sure there's heavier fines to hold these companies accountable, to untying our hands when it comes to some of the powers we have to make rules about things like brakes and hazardous materials. And we're going to find out. I think there is an opportunity here that is just different. It should not have required a situation like this incident for that to happen. But I do think we're on new terrain. But we're also going to keep working as a department with the powers we do have, even while we're asking Congress to help us make sure that we have a stronger hand to do this work.
Yeah, lastly, just to circle back to the very first question I asked you and that list, you had said looking at the transportation of vinyl chloride specifically, maybe materials like it that don't necessarily need to be transported, if they could be created and be manufactured on site, where you want to make some PVC pipe or some shower curtains or some, seats for cars, that there's a way to prevent these from being on railroad cars at all. You said that you would look at that, or that's worth looking at. What's it take to get that added to the list?
Well, I think that's something we've got to talk with EPA about and talk with other safety agencies in the administration. But what I will say is this. As long as there is any need for any hazardous material to move, and right now there is, industry requires that we move a lot of oil in this country. As long as there are those kinds of risks, we have to have the highest standard of safety. And I'm not going to rest until we've raised the bar a lot from where it is today.
Are there any other observations you have today for us here?
I just want to stress that there are things that the rail companies could change right now. They could enter whistleblower protection programs that we run right now, and I think that would contribute to safety. They could offer sick leave to their workers right now. A couple of them have begun negotiating this with their individual unions. They could right now notify local jurisdictions when they're bringing in hazardous material in. So look, we're going to do everything in our power with regulations, but they shouldn't have to wait on our regulations in order to do the right thing. I'm calling on them to do that, but we are prepared to use our powers to make sure that they do the right thing, whether they want to voluntarily or not.
Thank you for talking with me today.